My words today are titled Rebuilding Our Broken Bridge. I'm here to talk with you about a problem in our denomination and to outline some ways our congregation could be part of creating solutions to that problem. The problem I'm here to talk to you about is statistical and has been documented through research I will draw on here today, but it is also very much a matter of the heart, and I believe it requires a framework of mindful spiritual practice if we are to successfully address and transform it. What I'll start with here is, I hope, a clear articulation of the problem. UUs, as a denomination, have a very broken bridge between youth and adult involvement in our faith. While this is a challenge these days for denominations across the board, for UUs specifically, it is especially bad. I've been thinking about how to share with you some findings from the 2014 Pew Research Center study on religion, showing retention into adulthood, and Eileen's going to help me with this morning. I think I've come up with an idea that maybe won't put you all to sleep. I'd like to ask that you imagine the 10 red lily pads we put out for the children each Sunday morning for the story. Please imagine all 10 of them together as what it would look like if we retained 100% of our children into adulthood. Now, in actuality, according to the Pew study, if we were Hindu, 8 of our lily pads would be left. 80% of children raised Hindu continue to identify with the faith as adult. Get the idea? Likewise, if we were Muslim or Jewish, rounding up to the nearest lily pad, we would retain 8 lily pads. If we were historically Black Protestants, 7 lily pads would remain. Also, evangelical Protestants, 7 lily pads. Mormons rounding down and Catholics rounding up would retain 6 lily pads. If this were an exam score, we might call this a barely passing grade. Orthodox Christians would retain 5 lily pads, as would mainline Protestants. Also, those raised without religion would retain 5 lily pads. Buddhists, surprisingly to me, would retain only 4 lily pads. Jehovah's Witnesses, only 3. For Unitarian Universalists, dear ones, there would be 1 lily pad remaining. Only 12% of our youth continue with the faith into adulthood. Indeed, a 2009 UUA study reports that of the 4,000 young people our entire denomination graduates from religious education each year, we are gaining roughly 147 as adult members. For the math-minded, that figure rounds up to about 4%. This despite the fact that we are among the top 3 faiths in graduate degrees and that we rank first as a denomination in wealth. Dear ones, what I am reporting to you is, I believe, a terrible state of affairs. I know there are many here who might argue that they don't care what faith their children are, so long as they grow up to be happy, well-adjusted adults doing good in the world, and in a way, I understand you. But I'm here to suggest to you that we should care, and the fact that we so often do not care is one reason for the figures I've shared here. As the Reverend Francis Manley has put it, if the majority of our kids can continue to grow up to be small UUs, but join Episcopalian or Presbyterian churches because that's what their spouses are, or join no church at all, then we have not entirely failed, but we have failed in something important. That is, we have not helped them to understand and to feel that Unitarian Universalism is indeed a real faith tradition in its own right, rather than just a place to learn about other religious traditions. As many of you know, I am myself a lifelong UU, and I'd like to take a moment now to find my fellows. If you are a lifelong UU, that is, if you were raised in a UU congregation anywhere, and continue to be part of the UU congregation as an adult anywhere, even if you are visiting us for the first time today, please rise if you're able, or raise a hand. Please let us see you. Please remain standing or with your hand risen. And everyone look around, take a look. This is for you as well as for me, so take it in. How many and who are we? Thank you, lifelong UUs. Thank you so much for being with us still. Of course, I appreciate that all of you are here today to hear your DLRE preach from the pulpit, such as it is. But I want to take a moment just to thank these fellow lifers for still being with us. I'm about to tell you a bit of my story as a lifelong UU. I do this today in part because this is one of the 15 recommendations in this lovely book, Full Circle, 15 Ways to Grow Lifelong UUs by Kate Tweedy Ersley, a fellow DRE and third generation UU. She recommends, her 15th recommendation is that we find opportunities to celebrate founders, lifers, and UU heritage. So here's some of my story of lifelong UUism that I believe can help to illustrate recommendations from Ersley and others. Let me start by saying that I am the youngest of 5 siblings that my parents raised together in our household. Of these 5 siblings, I am the only lifelong UU. Statistically, I am a full 20% of the adult children raised in my household. So, in that sense, my parents and the UU congregations they and I have attended have beat the odds. Hooray! So how did I make it? Why am I still a UU? You know, other than the fact that when I was first attending the Palatine Church from ages 0 to 5, my parents routinely took us for donuts after church so that I came to associate Unitarian Universalism with chocolate Long Johns. That could actually be the whole reason, come to think of it. Let me start with the fact that my parents were part of an initiative at the Palatine Church and became members of Operation Breadbasket, Jesse Jackson's organization that was a predecessor to Operation Push and the Rainbow Coalition. Because of this church initiative, I attended a few Black church services and advocacy meetings as a very small person. I got to know some African American children from the city, some very well, as I could not have in my homogeneously white suburb. And I came to feel myself affiliated early on with an important social justice movement. This illustrates number 8 in Ersley's list, offer opportunities for all ages to live out UU values. It also illustrates number 14, sing together. I will never forget what I felt the first time I heard an African American choir. I was mesmerized and electrified, truly, as were my parents. More on number 14 later, but I just want to underscore here that it was a UU congregation's affiliation with Black churches that first helped solidify my UU identity. Thank you, Black churches, for that gift. When we moved to Libertyville when I was 5 years old, my family started attending the North Shore Unitarian Church in Deerfield, although irregularly. My mother didn't love the minister there the way she had loved Rupert Lovely in Palatine. The Deerfield Church wasn't as engaged in racial justice work as the Palatine Church had been. Moreover, my mother thought the culture there too intellectual and without sufficient food for the heart and spirit. We became Christmas and Easter Unitarians. So while we got to experience number 4 on Ersley's list, the ritualization of holidays and celebrations, my siblings and I missed out on numbers 2, 3, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. Irregular attendance meant we didn't benefit from engaging religious education, UU youth group, church-sponsored opportunities to live our UU principles, opportunities to receive mentorship from our minister or lay leaders, with one important exception that I'll talk about momentarily. We also didn't get good models for number 5, preparation for the negative aspects of being in community, how to manage a conflict toward resolution and reconciliation. One thing my parents did well was to celebrate UU identity. Our family dinner table was truly a nightly exercise in UU values, articulating them, complicating them, preparing to live them. It is definitely one place where I absorbed my UU identity. In part, yet importantly, this was not enough for my siblings to continue to identify as UU, in part because my parents were imperfect practitioners of Unitarian Universalism. That's right, you heard me, they were imperfect UUs. I have my tongue firmly in cheek here, but it's important information for all of us to bear in mind that one of the chief barriers to bridging cited by young adults is perceived hypocrisy within the church. But in contrast with my parents and siblings, I grew up wishing that we were more involved in our UU church. That said, my parents held every Friday night for all the years I was growing up an encounter group whose membership was largely drawn from the church. So this exposed me to other adult UU models, including, importantly for me, a lesbian couple who were the sum total of gay people I knew as a child. My parents also participated in events and spiritual development opportunities at church. I was only 6, I believe, when they took me to church to learn transcendental meditation. I received a mantra and learned a walking meditation that is still part of my practice to this day. That said, the church was several towns away from us, roughly half an hour's drive, and because I wasn't driving yet and truly needed a spiritual youth community, and because there was this boy I liked, I started to attend first youth group, then Bible study, then choir, then confirmation classes at a local Methodist church. I did a full course of confirmation there. Y'all came within inches of losing me at that time in my life. But ultimately, I couldn't reconcile myself to deciding to believe things. My whole life, my faith had been a matter of discernment, not decision. Much to Reverend Tom Ostrander's disappointment, I did not confirm as a Methodist. So when I finally got my driver's license at age 17, I did start attending the Deerfield Church more regularly, not for religious education or youth group, but for worship. Carol Romberg, who had been my first grade music teacher and then for 11 grades after that my piano teacher, was the organist and choir director at church. So once I was driving, she quietly recruited me into the choir. Remember number 14, singing together? Carol was truly a coach and mentor to me throughout my life. These were connections to church that my siblings didn't have, both the tie to a church mentor and the connection to worship as a young person. When I graduated from high school, I'm sorry to say that although I was at University of Illinois in Chambana, where is situated one of only a very few brick and mortar UU campus ministry centers in the nation, I didn't seek out UU campus ministry. And not because I couldn't have used it. I had a very rocky freshman year, very rocky. I really could have used some spiritual guidance, but I didn't have a car, and the center was miles away from my dorm. I couldn't have conceived of visiting them to ask whether there was someone I could hitch a ride with or how to take a bus. I wish, looking back, some caring adult had just taken me to visit the center, meet folks, find out what was happening there, and let me just say, when you look at how few resources UUs put into campus ministry, it's no wonder we lose so many at this stage. We have one full-time professional, Reverend Annie Milliken Gonzalez, in charge of campus ministry for the nation. Plus a handful of other DREs nationwide, usually housed in congregations close to a campus, who generally have a small percentage of their time designated for campus ministry. Compare this with the 1,000 professionals in 17 countries employed by Hillel International, and you begin to see why Jews retain 75% of their young people into Judaism in adulthood, and we retain only 12%. So during college, I attended church once a year at Christmas time. My sister, who no longer identifies as UU, also held her wedding there during my college years. I worked Sundays over the summer, so choir was not an option for me. I think I should add here, though, that the sanctuary itself is a big part of what I loved about being UU. Such a magical place. That North Shore community was formed, as some of you likely know, as a seedling church of our own UCE community, starting with 20 members of this church in 1953. I was born in 1964 and arrived at the church there in 1969, so that was a wonderful thing this community did for me. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you. I can't help but wonder today what might result if 20 people from our congregation decided to work together on the denominational problems of our broken bridge to adult faith. I discovered while I was reading this, preparing for today, that if I scrunch my face this way, I can sometimes stop crying. So. Okay. As an emerging adult, I lived right here in Evanston for a couple of years, and I'm sad to report never stepped foot inside this church. We moved around quite a bit. I became a mother right out of college, and I had a rough time with it. But my daughter was also the reason I ended up going back to church when she was 3. I wanted her to have a more regular church experience than I had had in the religion of my heart. I truly didn't realize at that point in my life that church could become so much more than a place to go to for worship, that it could truly become a spiritual community for me, for us. When I started attending in Elgin in my mid-20s, I requested a confirmation ceremony, and the Reverend Dan Brozier helped me craft one. It mattered to me, never having confirmed as a Methodist, that I would take an affirmative step to mark my lifelong entry into this faith. All of this to illustrate number 13 on Ursley's list, connect with our young adults. I also had my first immersion experience, number 11 on Ursley's list, attending Lake Geneva Summer Assembly for some years. I was able to afford the cost, though I was in grad school by then, because LGSA waived my registration fee for offering a week-long workshop. This was where I met my dear friend Will Van Dyke so many years ago, and Claudia Dancing, and so many other wonderful UU people, and where I first felt the power of our numbers. And this is the point for me, really. When I think about what the world would be like if we could bring our own shared principles, our values, more into being out there in a world that needs them so badly, it has often inspired me to reach out, to bring more folks into the fold. But maybe also, maybe even first, we need to be more careful, more deliberate, more systematic about reaching in. This past May, our congregation hosted a young adult conference for the first time, maybe ever. And may all the gods and goddesses bless Forrest Marie Linsell for bringing this conference to us. And this group of emerging young adults were part of what may have been our first ever bridging ceremony for our graduating seniors, welcoming them into young adulthood. Tomorrow night, we will hold an orientation for our first ever young adult covenant group. And in the coming year, Chris Allender and Valerie Curtis will launch a Friday night youth group series to add to our Sunday morning group. These are good signs for the youth and young adult ministry of this congregation. But friends, there is so much work to do. When I attended General Assembly for the first time ever this past June, and thank you all so much for sending me, I appreciate it. I was fortunate to attend a session with Emily Parker, a 22-year-old freshly graduated from Juniata College, who was sharing with us the research from her senior project, a 4-year survey of active UU young adults who had previously been through a bridging. One of the principal findings of her study was that involvement with Unitarian Universalism plummets drastically after bridging. Truly, this should come as no surprise to us, since UUs offer so little in terms of outreach for this age group. Only about half of youth in the survey reported feeling that their bridging had been successful by the study's end at the end of 4 years. But intriguingly, this included a significant number, 60%, who classified themselves as hopeful that they would eventually find significant opportunities to engage with the faith of their upbringing. This is good news of a sort, but as Emily herself says in her report, hope is two-sided. On one side, hope for future engagement signals that emerging adults still value the faith. On the other side, hope signals that emerging adults' current relationships with the faith are not what they hope for. Not every active UU youth has the commitment to do what Emily herself did, to launch a UU campus ministry on her college campus. But surely, we can be asking our young people about what they need and supporting them into getting it, in part through church. Surely, if we become more conscious of this enormous problem in our faith, we will begin to take steps to address it, won't we? So here are some recommendations emerging from Emily's study. Prepare youth for bridging by involving them in multi-generational settings, including opportunities for congregational and denominational leadership. Support emerging adults, especially in the important first year following their bridging ceremony, at a time when they are especially challenged in finding safe communal space and spiritual community. Create spaces for emerging adults on the other side of the bridge, including opportunities for involvement in social justice. This is an articulated lack in the lives of the young adults surveyed in Emily's study. Make involvement accessible, bearing in mind constraints in finances and transportation common with emerging adults. And crucially, denominationally, increase funding to the UUA Office of Youth and Young Adult Ministry. 9 lily pads gone, 1 remaining. This cannot be what we intend. Obviously, we can't force our young people to stay, and we wouldn't want to. Let me be clear, this is not what I'm suggesting. But I would like to see us doing more to invite them to events and rituals and programs invented just for them. Things we know they'll like because we've asked them, talked with them, built relationship with them, and asked them to help us build them. Thanks so much for being here today to bear this call, to bear witness to this call. If it sounds an echo in your heart, come find me. Our shared faith has been a mainstay in my life for as long as I have memory. It has led me back to a fulfilling life path again and again. Let's talk about what we might do to help our denomination to better mark and widen this path, and especially to help our young people in their hopeful struggle to remain on this path with us. Thanks for listening.